Hey there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Bible and Life podcast. My name is John Whitaker, and I am the creator of the Bible and Life podcast, as well as some other online resources. And this ministry exists because of the generosity of folks just like you. So thanks a ton to each and every one of you who make this possible through your faithful prayers, as well as your generous support. And if you want to join the team of supporters, the easiest way to do that is to go to johnwhitaker.net. Click the Give button, and it'll redirect you to my page at World Family Mission, registered nonprofit, where then you can follow the links there. That'll take you to a page where you can set up a one-time donation, or you can click a little box that says Make This Monthly and set up a recurring monthly donation there as well. As we begin this episode, just a bit of an update. I returned recently from my trip to Alaska. The trip was great, met a lot of wonderful brothers and sisters in the Lord. Felt like the talks went well. And my prayer is I would invite you to join me in praying this along with me. Pray that the Lord would make that weekend more fruitful than would be possible were it just me giving some good talks, that the Lord would bear good fruit from it that would help the church that I was working with there to both live as disciples, but even more to create really a climate and an environment in which growing, strong, healthy, mature disciples is just kind of part and parcel of the way they do church. So join me in praying for that the Lord would work in that church, use what I had to say beyond anything I did for his purposes there in Anchorage, Alaska. Also, another little update. I recently began studying through the book of Revelation on the listener's commentary. If you haven't checked that out, you can find it on your podcast feed. It has its own app, which makes it a whole lot easier to use. So if you go to your app store, Google Play, wherever you download apps, and just search for the listener's commentary, you'll find the app. And that's where I study just straight through books of the New Testament. And there's a little PDF download on the website at listenerscommentary.com/revelation. If you go there, there's a 20-page or so PDF download completely free that'll kind of give you a study guide for how to approach the book of Revelation responsibly and wisely, some bonus resources to help you dig in and study it as well. And so if you're interested in studying the book of Revelation along with me, I recommend that to you as well. All right, I want to begin here a short little series on the Bible and Life podcast, where what I want to look at with you is what I'm kind of calling ironic boasts of the Bible. There's probably a better way to say that, but what I'm thinking of is where the Bible calls us to boast in things that are ironic, that are unexpected, that are surprising and contrary to what we would normally think of the kinds of things you should boast in. And all the passages that I want to look at for the next handful of weeks where this idea shows up use a particular Greek word, something from the word family of kaukema, kaukasis, kaukamai, something in that word family to call us as followers of Jesus to boast in unexpected and surprising things and in unexpected and surprising ways. And this particular word, kaukema, and its relative words, is a word that has the idea of like to proudly rejoice in. Sometimes it's even translated celebrate. It's sort of the idea of what happens when, say, your team wins the Super Bowl or they win the championship, and there's fist bumping and high fives, and you're super excited, and you can hardly contain yourself. You're proudly rejoicing in that sort of thing. Well, that's the feel, the sense of this particular word family. And typically, when we use that word, right, when we experience that emotion, we're talking about things like really exciting, awesome, great things about, we get a great health report, we get a promotion on our job, we are super excited because our kids won such and such award by their academic achievement in college or whatever else it is. Those are typically the kinds of things that we we rejoice in and boast in this sense, things that are typically our pride and joy. But in the Bible, there are some surprising passages that are like, whoa, hold on. I did not expect that. I didn't expect to be commanded, called, invited to boast in that kind of thing. That's what I want to focus on over the next handful of weeks on this podcast series, Ironic Boasts of the Bible. And the first passage I want to look at is a passage out of the book of Galatians, Galatians chapter 6. Specifically, Galatians 6:14. It's right at the very tail end of the letter to the churches of Galatia. Again, if you want to hear all my thoughts on that letter or on even really this whole section of the letter, you can check that out on the listener's commentary where I study through the book of Galatians. But this little passage, we need to hear it, so I want to read it to you, and then I want to give you a little backstory to the book of Galatians, and then I want to come back and reflect on how surprising this is. And so Galatians chapter 6, verse 14 says this, "But far be it from me," this is the Apostle Paul writing, "far be it from me to boast except in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, through which the world has been crucified to me, and I to the world." Now, that is like about as surprising, unexpected plot twist as there could ever be. What? You're going to boast in the cross? You're going to, really? And we need to make sure we hear it that way, as surprising and unexpected as it is. In the context of the book of Galatians, Paul, at this point, as he's wrapping up the letter, has argued in the book how the cross of Jesus puts everything into proper perspective. And the original setting for the book of Galatians is you had some ultra-conservative Jewish followers of Jesus who have shown up in and around the churches of Galatia and are telling them that, yeah, Jesus is the Messiah, but if you really want to be part of Abraham's family and you really want to experience the full blessing of God, then you also need to kind of keep some of the key Jewish laws as well. You need to get circumcised and keep some food laws and be observant at least of the ritual calendar to some degree or not. You got to add Judaism onto Jesus, or what you really want to do maybe is to tack Jesus onto Judaism. And Paul has argued stridently against that in the letter to the Galatians. And now as he wraps up the letter, he's been dictating it to his scribe, and he picks up the pen here at the end of the letter, and he kind of writes the concluding paragraph to the letter himself. And in that context, those are the words he says, "Far be it from me to boast in anything except the cross of Jesus Christ." I don't want my identity, my worth, the thing I celebrate in, the thing that's my pride and joy to be anything but the cross of Jesus Christ. Now, we're so used to talking about the cross. We're so used to singing about the cross. We wear crosses on our jewelry, crosses on our necklaces and our earrings. We have beautiful ornate crosses in our church buildings. We're so used to thinking about, talking about, imagining the cross that we lose the shock value of what Paul just said in Galatians 6:14. In the Roman world of Paul's day, what was the cross? Before it became a religious kind of icon of followers of Jesus, what was the cross? Well, it was an instrument of execution that was horrific. And in fact, the word excruciating comes from the Latin for out of the cross. Like it was horrific, brutal, an excruciating way to die. It was, in some senses, almost like a official government-sponsored form of terrorism, like to tear the populace into submission to the Roman Empire. That's really how the cross functioned. That's why when they crucified people, they would do it in one of the most visible public places near the city, so everyone could see and everyone could hear the groans and the wails and watch the person die and realize you don't want to cross the Roman emperor. You don't want to cross the empire. You don't want to go against the governor. If you do, that's what's going to happen to you. And it was really a horrific way to die. A person would have their ankles nailed into an upright member of the cross, right? And their wrists nailed into the crossbeam for the cross. Sometimes they'd also be tied on there. So they'd be anchored to this post that was, as we now call it, the cross. It was in the shape of a cross. They'd be anchored to that, and they would slowly, as they writhed in agony, slowly bake out in the heat and suffocate and die. And it was a slow, slow death. And sometimes to speed it up, even as we see in the case of the two that are hanging next to Jesus in the Gospels, they would come by with a club and break the lower leg so they could no longer push themselves up to get a breath. Because as they hung there, right, in order to get a breath in their lungs, they had to kind of lift themselves up on the nail that was through their ankles, creating even more agony as they did that. And so every breath caused pain through their whole body. And eventually, in their weakness, they just couldn't lift themselves up anymore. And to speed that up, sometimes the Romans would break their legs and they could no longer get a breath and they would slowly suffocate. Horrible way to die. Excruciating pain. The nails going through the wrist typically would crush what we call the funny bone, but when you really hit your funny bone, it's not very funny and it hurts. Well, that's a big nerve that goes through that forearm, and typically the nail going through the wrist would just crush that and so cause excruciating pain, even just with that moment, and then the whole time you're hanging there just twisting on that thing. And so just an awful, horrific way to die. That's the cross. The Romans had perfected it as a way of basically saying to the conquered lands, you don't go against us. It was so awful that Roman citizens themselves were exempt from being crucified. It was reserved really for the lowest of the low, the worst criminals of the day, specifically on the fringes and the outskirts of empire, as a way to remind them that Rome's in charge and we will do away with you just like this. You will die this slow, painful, awful death if you go against our authority and do anything that is contrary to Roman law, Roman peace, Roman authority. It was horrific. It was so bad that you had like Roman writers basically saying Romans should never use the Latin word for cross in polite company because it was such a vulgar and horrific way to die. That's the cross. That's what the cross was before Jesus himself died on it, rose from the dead, and we sing about it and celebrate it. It was an absolute awful sort of thing. And yet Paul says here, far be it from me. Far be it from me to boast in anything. I'm not going to make anything else my pride and joy. I'm not going to make anything else that I bank on and find my security in except the cross of Jesus Christ. That the cross of Jesus is now the centerpiece of Paul's life. It is his pride and joy. This awful, horrific thing has become a source of celebration and boasting and counting on. Why? Well, because of what the cross achieved. I mean, notice when Paul says that he doesn't boast in Jesus Christ. Elsewhere he might say that. But here in Galatians 6:14, he boasts in the cross because the cross is this moment where somehow in the person of Jesus, God dealt with sin and death and evil for all time. He purchased our pardon. He defeated the powers and the principalities. He triumphed over the forces of evil. He defeated injustice, all in the cross. Through both his love and his justice, they meet in that moment and they deal with everything that has wrecked and ruined God's good creation, including you and me. So the cross really is this climactic moment in history. That's why, as you read through the four Gospels, particularly when you read through like Mark and John, the cross is the culminating moment. It's this climactic moment where in the Gospel of John, it's the moment where Jesus is crowned with glory. In the Gospel of Mark, it's the place where it's Jesus' coronation day, and he's become king on that day, and he's crowned with glory and honor. It is this climactic moment where God has reclaimed his world, and his glory has shone forth in a way that never had before. And because of that, Paul is going to boast and celebrate and proudly rejoice in the cross. And what he has said through the book of Galatians, and what he's saying implicitly by his own example here as he wraps up the book of Galatians is, I want you to boast in the cross too. I want you to make the cross your pride and joy too. Don't boast in your own accomplishments. Don't boast in your own achievements. Don't boast in your own moral record. Don't boast in what you've done for Jesus. Don't boast in how great your family is. Don't boast. Like, all those things are nice. All those things may bring some good effects, but they're not the thing that we say, here's my pride and joy. For that, Paul says, we should look to the cross. We should look to the cross. And the reason for that is because it's where, on the cross, where Jesus saved us, where Jesus dealt the death blow to sin and death. And when we make our accomplishments and our resume the thing that is our pride and joy, well, then functionally that thing is like essentially almost our savior. We're like, I am establishing my life and I am securing my life based on my resume, or based on how well my kids turned out, or based on how great my career went, or based on how decent and good of a person I am, or based on how many degrees I have and how smart we are. When we boast in those things, they functionally become our savior. They're self-made attempts to secure our own life and justify our existence. In essence, by doing that, we're saying we're going to rely on those things to save us, or at least so we think. And so even though they might be good things, they must never become ultimate things. They must never become the thing. They must never be our pride and joy. And so with Paul, we need to say, no, I'm going to boast in the cross of Christ, through which, notice what he says, through which the world has been crucified to me, and I to the world. What he means by that is the world's system, the world's standards, the world's values, the world's way of operating. That's what he's talking about, through the kinds of things that the world says really matter, the kinds of things that the world would say, here's what makes you a successful human being. Here's what makes you a good human, whatever it is, and whatever part of the world you live in. Every culture has its kind of like definitive ways of saying, man, there's a person that made it. Like, we would point someone to and say, try to be like them, whatever that might be. A nice home, nice car, a good job, a good bank account, being good, decent folk, whatever it is, right? Like being tolerant to everybody. It doesn't matter what it is. There's certain values that different sectors of the world say, there you go, that's what really matters. And Paul says, through the cross, all that stuff was crucified to me, and I was crucified to it. It's no longer the yardstick by which I measure the value and worth and success of my life. My yardstick is something else. My yardstick is Jesus and the cross. So to maybe help you and I boast more fully in the cross, let me just answer this question. Why is the cross so great? Why would Paul say, I want to boast in that? What did the cross achieve? Well, let me just list off a handful of things for us. The cross purchased my pardon. The cross paid for my sin. The cross secured my ultimate victory. The cross made me God's friend. The cross destroyed the works of the devil. The cross set me free from sin and death. The cross delivered me from this present evil age, as Paul says in Galatians chapter 1. The cross has kept me from the wrath of God. The cross freed me from perfectionism, moralism, and legalism. The cross ultimately demonstrated God's own love for me. And so, as Paul said earlier in the letter to the Galatians, I want to be able to say along with him, I have been crucified with Christ, and it's no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. The life I live in the flesh, I want to live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself up for me. That's Galatians 2:20. And so may it be for you and for me that, like the Apostle Paul, though it's strange and ironic that we would make an object of torture and death the centerpiece of our life because of what God accomplished through the cross of Jesus Christ, may we boast in the cross. All right, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Bible and Life podcast. I look forward to talking with you again next week.